What's going on, everybody? Welcome into Prime Sports Network. I'm CJ Carpenter. College football season is officially right around the corner, and one thing has finally arrived: media days. The Big 12 wraps their media day up today. The ACC is getting ready to take center stage in Charlotte, and before long, the SEC and Big 10 will be answering questions from the media as every program tries to convince the country they're ready to compete for a national championship. This is one of my favorite times of the year because hype meets reality. Every coach says they're better. Every quarterback says the offense is clicking. Every fan base believes this is finally their year. But beneath all that excitement are some very real questions that they have to answer before week 0 and for most teams week 1. So today we're breaking it all down, the biggest storylines heading into the 2026 college football season. Let's get into it. Looking at way too early top 25 rankings, and honestly it's not hard to understand why. The Buckeyes return Julian Sayon, who enters the season as one of the favorites to win the Heisman Trophy, and he's got elite arm talent. He's got another full offseason under his belt. I mean, the expectations are really high. You could almost compare them to Arch Manning level expectations when Arch finally had his first season of fully starting. But he's not the only superstar on this offense. Jeremiah Smith is probably the most talented receiver in college football. He's another legitimate Heisman candidate, probably around the 5th to 4th, somewhere in there, ranked among, top players to win the Heisman. And you would say that Jeremiah Smith's a dark horse because he's a wide receiver. He's not a quarterback. So, and of course, when you got a guy like Julian Sayon who's on your offense, like, Sayon's going to get more credit than Smith because the ball is being delivered from Julian. Smith is making the play. So it's going to be tough for, Smith to be able to win that Heisman when you've got that elite arm talent, but he's in the conversation for sure. I know Ohio State has a tough schedule. They got a road trip to Texas, a road trip to Indiana to kind of point out some of their bigger games this year. And those aren't, those are playoff defining games. Like, those are teams you could meet again in the playoff. Like, so the biggest question is not just the talent. Like, the talent's there. That's known. It's, can Julian Sayon elevate this offense in the biggest moments against elite competition? They're going to be tested. They're going to have, big games. Of course, Michigan's one of those big games at the end of the season. And it's really about, does the poise show up for Julian Sayon? And, does Jeremiah Smith deliver in big moments? This is a team that's very capable of winning a national championship. They're up there with some of the best teams. And I think, they're definitely the favorite among a lot. But can they do it? Can they put the pieces together? Can Ryan Day put the pieces together? Can they figure it out and, make a run? And I think they can. Honestly, if I was to say a favorite, I think, Ohio State is probably my favorite. But another team to keep an eye on is Oregon. Right behind Ohio State, Oregon sits at number 2. They got huge news. Dante Moore decided to return instead of entering the NFL draft. Now, Dante Moore probably would have gone pretty early in this draft. I mean, this past draft class was not huge. You had Fernando Mendoza, and then it's a huge drop-off, right? I think the next guy to go was Ty Simpson. So it wasn't a huge quarterback draft class. I think, if Dante can have a good season this year, he's going to go into a really deep draft class. I'd expect Julian Sayon to declare. I'd expect a guy, if Lenore Sellers has a good year at South Carolina, I'd expect him to declare. So Dante, I think, really wants to define himself as a quarterback that can lead a team. And, what he's going to be able to do here is show his leadership, show his experience. And I think Oregon has another team that has a good shot. So, but their offense, not necessarily, that's not necessarily their concerns. Will Stein accepted a Kentucky coaching job. He's the offensive coordinator, he's the guy that, Moore was used to last year, and defensive coordinator Tosh Lupoy left for Cal. So those are massive changes, right? This is a team that is going to go through some tricky situations, especially late in games. Dante Moore spent all offseason learning an entirely new offensive system. So that talent's still there. Expectation is still there. Um, you know, the question is, will everything click once the light's on? What is this system that these new offensive coordinator wants to put in? How does Dan Lanning respond to the fact that he lost both of his coordinators? So that's the biggest question I think facing Oregon right now. They are a good football team. They're one of the teams that's been at the top for the past couple of years, and they've done a good job with that, I feel like. But late in games, those reps are going to become more valuable. Making sure you know the system, that's going to become more valuable. I mean, to look at South Carolina, like we'll talk about them for a little bit here. I mean, they had a 9-3 season, and Lenore Sellers was a top quarterback, right? He was expected to win the Heisman the next year, and they were expected to be probably, if not in the college football playoff race, right outside of the college football playoff race, right? New offensive coordinator comes in, and it's a complete drop off. I mean, 4-8 last year, right? And I get it; they play in the SEC; they have a tough schedule, but the talent was there for South Carolina, and I think I don't think you're going to see a huge drop off like you did with South Carolina with a team like Oregon. I think I'd expect them to be in the college football playoff race, but it's real. Like when you have a new system and you have something where a new, like, I think for South Carolina the play calling was too advanced. I think that was a struggle. Bringing an NFL style play calling, and you saw Lenore Sellers really struggle. You saw the offensive line really struggle, and Oregon hasn't had those issues. So I think it's something to keep an eye on, for sure. But take a look at the rest of the top 10, and Georgia is ranked number 3, Notre Dame at 4, Texas, Indiana, Miami, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and LSU. So a majority of SEC teams are in that top 10. Every one of these teams believe they have a college football playoff potential, but there's one team that really stands out to me, and that's Indiana. Last season made a incredible run with Fernando Mendoza, 16-0, won the national championship. And replacing a quarterback just like Mendoza, went number 1 to the Raiders, and best of luck to him as he goes and looks for, his successful career with them. Joined alongside Kirk Cousins in the NFL. So replacing a number 1 pick is never easy. I think Indiana feels very confident that they may have found their answer in Josh Hoover. Hoover transferred from TCU, incredible season, finished 2nd in the Big 12 in passing yards, 9th nationally with 29 passing touchdowns, and TCU had a 9-3 record. They're not going to ask him to be Fernando Mendoza, but they want to keep winning football games. They've won the national championship. They would love to be back there. I think if Hoover can settle in quickly, I think they could be one of the best teams in the nation. Of course, Big 12 to Big 10, big difference, in the teams that you're going to play. You're going to play a team like Michigan, Ohio State, Iowa, Illinois, different teams like that. And, one of those teams could be a team that you meet in the Big Ten championship game. More than likely a team like Ohio State. So I think it really is, can Hoover settle in? It's a big step up. I think the Big Ten's probably one of the best football conferences in the nation. I think the SEC still has it. I think the Big Ten might be right behind them now. I think maybe it's then the ACC. It's definitely, a conversation that's changed with the transfer portal. But can Hoover figure it out and learn how to play in a Big Ten system with, some Big Ten wide receivers, Big Ten defenses? How does that adjustment affect him? Can Cignetti coach him well? We're going to figure that out. That's a question that's definitely going to be answered and definitely asked on Big Ten Media Day, so keep an eye out on that. But speaking of that transfer portal, let's look at the quarterback carousel. Every offseason, we see college football changes, quarterbacks move around. This was no different, especially in December. One of the biggest names, Darian Mensah. Miami looking to replace Carson Beck after his departure to the NFL. Mensah now steps into one of the ACC's premier programs. Miami made it all the way to the national championship game last year. Now the expectation isn't getting back. It's finishing the job, and Mensah believes he's capable of doing exactly that. And Miami certainly has the roster around him, so we'll see if he can elevate them. Mensah was a guy that at Duke last year was incredible. I mean, he was second in passing yards in the nation, second in passing touchdowns with 34. So Darian Mensah believes he can get this roster right back to the national championship game in Miami. And Miami was not far off from winning a national championship with Carson Beck. And now you add a guy like Mensah who's, young, and maybe you lose him in the draft, especially if he has a good year. He could be a guy that you talk about winning the Heisman. But, Mensah's a guy that you want on your team. A leader. I know Duke hates to have lost him. But what to expect, I think, is more of the same from Mensah. I don't think anything is going to change. I think he's going to bring that same energy he did from Duke into Miami. I think that game against Duke, if they have them this year, is going to be something extra special, especially if it's on the road. You know that student section is going to go after him. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. He wants to go and win the ACC once again because he won it with Duke. And, Miami didn't win it last year. They lost a couple games. So I think Mensah wants to say, hey, I won the ACC here and here. So we'll see what Darian Mensah can do. But now let's take a look at Brandon Sorsby, one of the biggest stories so far in the offseason. It's not really about football. It's about eligibility. Sorsby admitted to placing bets involving teams that he played for while at multiple schools, including Indiana. Transferred into Texas Tech, hoping to continue his career, but his eligibility became one of the biggest legal stories in college athletics. Court rulings temporarily challenged the NCAA's decision, and at one point a Texas court reduced the punishment all the way to just a 2-game suspension. Led to significant controversy. A lot of opponents that were set to play Texas Tech said, we're not going to play you. So they canceled the scheduled game rather than compete under the ruling. So Sorsby eventually ruled ineligible for the entire 2026 season. The result, Texas Tech will now move forward without the quarterback as he has been ruled ineligible for the entire season. He can go in toward the 2027 draft. He will not play at all this year. But Texas Tech was the favorite. Now their attention moves to Will Hammond. Hammond, returning from an ACL injury, suddenly becomes one of the most important players in the Big 12. Can he stay healthy? And can he lead Texas Tech through one of the most competitive conferences in America? We'll find out soon enough. He's been answering questions. Again, their media day ends today, July 8th. So we'll keep an eye on that situation. And the Big 12 commissioner answered questions about the situation, was very hesitant to answer those. I'm sure he doesn't want to deal with it too much. It's over, done with, move on from it. In Alabama is a situation where it's over, done with, and move on because Ty Simpson is no longer an Alabama Crimson Tide quarterback. He is in the NFL. So every year it seemed simple for Alabama. Every year it seemed like another NFL-level quarterback walked through the door. This year it's not quite there. Ty Simpson, again, first-round draft pick to the Rams. Alabama enters this fall camp, one of the biggest quarterback competitions in the country. Keelan Russell, Austin Mack, Jet Tamala. 3 talented quarterbacks, 1 starting job. And Alabama has built a reputation on producing elite quarterbacks. And these next few weeks will probably determine whether the Crimson Tide have another star or what growing pains could be ahead. And that's what makes this time of year so much fun. The rankings, our predictions, the preseason hype is exciting, but eventually every hype question gets answered on the football field. Can Ohio State live up to the pressure? Will Oregon's new offense hit the ground running, or will they have some growing pains? Will Indiana stay among the nation's elite? Who will win Alabama's quarterback battle? And which transfer quarterback becomes the biggest story of the season? We're only a couple months away from finding out. So if you enjoyed today's video, make sure to like it, subscribe to Prime Sports Network. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Follow the Instagram at Prime Sports Network. Look out for Substack articles written pretty much every day. Which team has the biggest questions mark entering the 2026 football season? I'm CJ Carpenter. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time right here on Prime Sports Network.